Well, I've been doing some tracing on this chassis trying to determine which coil is missing, and if my assumption on the band switch is correct, where counterclockwise is broadcast band, then according to what I've traced out, the coil that's missing should be the broadcast band antenna coil, because there's only one spot where I have continuity from the contact on the band switch to that coil wire, the spare wire here, and that's in the broadcast position. So based on what I can see, I need a broadcast band antenna coil mounted right down here. Hopefully one of those universal replacements is going to do the job. The other challenge is going to be figuring out which connection on the schematic is which pin number on the coil, but it shouldn't be too hard once I've got something to hook everything back up to. And I'm also have to go back through, and some of these parts have been changed at some point before I got a hold of it, and I don't know what's been modified and what hasn't, from the, if anything's been changed from the original configuration. But this capacitor here is definitely a modern one. It's very small, electrolytic. Factory electrolytic is still up there in the corner. I'll probably be leaving that in place and just put the new ones underneath the chassis because they're so small. But yeah, starting to narrow down and make a little bit of progress anyway. While I'm waiting for some parts to arrive, I've done some more testing on this chassis. I've verified all the voltages are correct on the transformer, so that's good. I've noticed that the rectifier tube socket is not original. Somebody's just got this one mounted on top and held in place with some screws. It doesn't look very pretty. Normally, let's see if I can pull this tube out here. Normally the factory sockets look like this and they're riveted in place. So I'm not sure what happened there. Somebody probably broke the socket at one point. Also, the filter capacitor has been changed. I can see where the original one used to be. There's kind of some marks here, and this just looks like it's an aftermarket part. I've noticed that the rubber mounting grommets for the tuning capacitor really need to be replaced. They're completely dried out. Other than that, no real big surprises yet. The next thing I'm going to do is check these coils to make sure they're not open or burned. I'm going to pull the covers off if I need to. I've noticed that the knobs are not original based on what I've seen in the pictures. So yeah, every time I look at this a little bit more, I see more and more things that are not original. So it's unfortunate that it's had to been tampered with so much and had the value depreciated with all these different parts that have been put in here. I think I've got most of the parts on hand to begin this restoration now. So I've started removing some stuff off this chassis to set it aside for safekeeping. First off the tubes, and the next thing I'm going to do is remove the dial face and set that aside because this plastic is very fragile and it's already warped and cracked in a couple spots, like around the rivets here. And also the reflector in the back, this brown colored plastic disc, is also cracked around the fasteners and warped. So I've got to be very careful with this, but I need to take the tuning condenser off and replace the mounting grommets and clean this chassis up. Then I can really get a good look at all the components underneath here and start making notes on where everything goes and what component each part is in relation to the schematic. But this is not going to be an easy job, so I've got to take my time and make sure everything is done properly. Can't rush anything like this. I've got the dial face removed, and you can see the crack in the reflector behind it. It's too bad this thing's riveted down to the pulley. I could try to take it off and repair it, but almost looks as if the plastic has shrunk, because where it's cracked, it's actually overlapping itself. So it's not like I can, line the edge of that crack back up and glue it very easily. Might have to leave it as is, or put some silicone or something in that crack to help reinforce it. It was pretty scary trying to take that dial pointer off too. I was really afraid it was going to bend or break on me because it was stuck on this knurled shaft here, but luckily it came off without being harmed. So now I've got to remove the string and the tuning condenser. This does have quite a bit of grime in between the plates, and like I mentioned earlier, it needs a new set of rubber grommets very badly. Well, that's interesting. Eight to 20 microfarads dual. That explains that other electrolytic that was soldered in there. This is only a 2-section cap instead of the original 3-section. I wonder how old this thing is. I've gone through the chassis and written down all of the components and their positions, identified everything, what it was on the schematic, and started measuring all the resistors. I found that probably half of them are well out of their rated tolerance and are going to have to be replaced. And there's only a couple of capacitors that I might be able to leave in here that are mica. Hopefully those are still good. The rest of them are paper and are going to have to be changed. So I'm basically changing the majority of all the passive components in this radio, and it's going to be a lot of work. So hopefully there's no more bad coils, because I'm going to be really upset if I do all that work and find out this thing still isn't going to run because one of the other coils is toasted. I have no way of knowing what the ohms are supposed to be on each coil because it's not marked on the schematic. But I have tested them to make sure that none of them are totally open, which they appear to be fine in that respect so far. But hey, this is definitely in worse shape than I ever imagined. It's going to be pretty much a complete rebuild of this chassis. But it might be fun. We'll see how it goes. I've got the tone control potentiometer removed so I can get better access to this tube socket. I've already got almost all the parts changed on this terminal strip. These are mainly the dropping resistors for the power supply, and they were all way out of tolerance. I've also found that on the tube socket for the audio output tube, there's just a big mess of wire strands all over the socket lugs from, it appears to be from when the transformer was changed, and they didn't properly wrap the strands, so they're just all over the place on this socket, and I'm in the process of cleaning that up. And also getting ready to replace these few passive components that are on here at the same time. I just love having a desoldering gun. It makes even the bigger jobs so much easier, especially when you have things like this where there's giant globs of solder on all the terminals, and this thing can just vacuum them clean within a couple seconds. And I just emptied the reservoir there a minute ago because it actually filled up. 5 or 6 hours later, I've got some good progress on this now. I've got all the new filter caps installed that took the place of the original multi-section can that was mounted on the chassis. I took this terminal strip out, replaced all the dropping resistors for the power supply. They were the higher wattage ones. Those were way out of tolerance, so got all those changed out. Got the terminal strip remounted. It was missing one of its screws, and I was fortunate to find an exact replacement for that, so that's all back in there. Took a long time for me to clean up that huge mess that was on the bottom of the tube socket here for the output tube. All the lugs had a lot of remnant wire, wire strands and component leads and just big gobs of solder on it. I stripped everything off that socket and redid it from scratch, so that took a while. I've got some resistors and caps changed over here, but I've got a couple more solder connections to make. But it's coming along pretty well. Right now I've got a bit of a setback because none of my soldering equipment has enough power to melt this massive solder joint down here in the chassis that connects this capacitor and also the ground strap for the tuning condenser. So I've got to take care of that and reinstall the tone control potentiometer once I clean it. And then I think the next step is going to be to change this hideous rectifier tube socket, and I've got a nice vintage replacement that's in perfect condition with no corrosion or anything on it that I'm going to use, and actually be able to mount it in there properly. Let's see, what else have I done to this today? I think that was pretty much it. I've only got 4 more wax paper caps to change down on this end here, and that's it for the caps. There's also a couple of more resistors here and there, but I'm surprised I made it as far as I did today for about 6 hours worth of work. I thought this volume control looked a little funny, and I realize now that this was taken out of another radio, and they cut, you can see the different colored wire from what's normally in here. It looks like they just cut it out of another radio and left the little bits of wire on there and spliced onto them. So I gotta clean that up too. That resistor down there is going to be an absolute nightmare to get to. I'm going to have to take out all these coils and trimmer caps and wires just to get access to that socket. It's too risky to be going near these coils with the soldering iron. So I'm really not looking forward to that. I can't believe I got that piece of crap. That was a challenge. No room to work without bumping any of these fragile coils. Now the next challenge I have is getting this old piece of cap lead off this coil lug here that also has several wires attached to it. And then I can attach the new cap and its insulating sleeve and put all these coils back in place. I'll feel a lot better once this stuff's not all hanging out like this. Well, I did a quick wipe down on the chassis with some Simple Green and a rag, just so I could see what I was working on a little bit easier. Also took out the old rectifier socket and prepped the replacement. This is a used socket that I salvaged out of some old test equipment a few years ago. Really high quality one made by Cinch. I think it was in some old HP RF generator equipment or something. I don't remember, but I've cleaned all the old wire remnants off the lugs, and this will fit right in the chassis on the original mounting holes from underneath like it's supposed to be. And just for comparison, here's the old socket. Yeah. I'm glad to be changing this out. The new socket for the rectifier turned out really nice. Even the color matches the originals. It's just a little bit different style, but I found some more of those screws that are the same thing that's used on the rest of the chassis, so at least that matches. Got the new grommets installed for the tuning condenser. Once that's cleaned and lubed, I'll be putting that back on. Underside of the chassis is coming along pretty good too. I've got a couple components left to put back in. And got to put the AC cord on, got to install a fuse holder, got to replace the wires for the dial lamps. I didn't realize how torn up these wires were. I can actually see bare spots on these, and if that shorts out, it shorts out the transformer, so that's definitely not good. I've got the potentiometers disassembled so I can clean these and lubricate them. Right now they're very hard to turn. They've got some old dried up grease inside them. Other than that, they're in good condition though, and they should turn out really nice. Get those put back in, and getting closer and closer to being done. Still got to put that coil back in that was missing when I first got it too. Hopefully that's going to work out okay. Probably going to have to replace some of these wires now because they're too short. You know, a bunch of little stuff just keeps coming along, but little by little it's slowly coming back together. Here's a look at the tuning condenser assembly. I've got the diffuser and the pulleys and everything removed so they can work on this. This isn't one of the ones that has the mica trimming capacitors on it. It's just a plain variable capacitor, so it makes it a little bit easier to work with. Nonetheless, when cleaning these, you still have to be extremely careful to use something very, very soft, because even the slightest bend of one of these plates will throw off the tracking of the receiver. So I'm going to have to be very gentle cleaning this. Let's see how it turns out. Anybody want some radio soup? Don't that look tasty? Now I just got to rinse this thing off. Oh, that's looking a bit better. Once it's fully dried, I can start reinstalling it on the chassis. It's not going to be perfect. It's got so much discoloration and pitting, but as long as it's not going to short out, it should be okay. I think I'm actually getting somewhat close to being done with this. I've got to get the speaker fixed up and put the grid cap lead back on here and put that missing coil back in, but I'm really tempted to try powering this thing up and see if it operates on the shortwave band before I go any farther. I really want to do something different with this other than poke around underneath the chassis for once. And the field coil and transformer windings appear to be good on the speaker, even though the speaker itself is in pretty rough shape. I think the next thing I'm going to do is put deoxit in all these tube sockets and connect the speaker. Try powering this up with the Variac. Now that it has a fuse installed in it, it's a lot safer to apply power and not risk damaging the transformer. Well, just out of curiosity, I'm going to see if this will operate on the shortwave band just as it sits. Because the only thing I have left to put back in here is the missing antenna coil for the broadcast band. And I've got the usual setup, the Variac and the current limiting light bulb. It's 100 watts. I've got a 500 milliamp fuse installed. I'll determine the final value after I'm done with the radio. And I've got my voltmeter on the output of the rectifier tube. So, moment of truth. Let's see what this thing does. I gotta be really careful because I don't know if everything's even correct in this chassis. It was in such a kind of a mess when I first got it. Well, got a few volts already. I've got 40 volts AC going in, and the output of the rectifier is climbing, so that's kind of a good sign. I'm going to check a few other points on here at low voltage before I go any further. Mainly check all the voltages at the tube plates. Well, I'm starting to hear some stuff on the shortwave band, so that's a good sign. Everything's at pretty much full operating voltage right now, no problems. I've just got to get my antenna situation straightened out, see if I can get some reception here. I can only get one station on this thing, and it's really hard to tune.
And I told you that anytime God's nature finds an outlet on the stage of time, in the New Testament, the word describes time, which is godly action on the stage of time, being expressed to be seen in time and space.
Well, it's progress anyway. Now I gotta try to get the AM band working. Check this out. I decided to test the AM band by hooking up this coil with alligator clips, and I actually got it right on the first try. It works perfectly. I cannot believe that. I mean, not only did this thing power right up on the first try and work, but even the broadcast band with the aftermarket coil not doing any alignment, and it just starts up and works. Crazy. It's hard to tune the radio without the pulley-driven tuning dial because it's such a sensitive adjustment.
Mark Cunningham was placed on 2 years of supervised
rate for at least the next couple of FOMC meetings. Also today,
Now I am using my outdoor antenna because obviously I'm not going to pick up anything down here in the basement with a short piece of wire on an old radio like this, but it's still very encouraging so far.
Ultimate in luxury, design, comfort, and service. Now available with Lincoln MK and MKC. Hines Park, Lincoln, and Plymouth on Ann Arbor Road and I-275. Per game, shooting better than 50.
So I think this station here is fairly local to where I am. But yeah, I'm happy to see that it's working so well. I'm just going to figure out how I'm going to mount this coil in here without making any major cosmetic modifications, because this coil requires a 5/16 diameter mounting hole, and I really don't want to drill the chassis out to accommodate that, so I'm going to see if I can make a small bracket or something to hold this, or replace these old wires, and maybe the new ones will be stiff enough to hold the coil on their own. It's also designed to be wire mounted, so that's a possibility, but I think the worst is over. The only thing I'm afraid of at this point is when I go to replace these old wires, a lot of them are attached to this coil here, and I'm really afraid to keep messing with the soldered lugs on that coil because it's old and brittle. But as long as that doesn't fall apart, everything should be fine. Putting the rest of it together is going to be easy. I've made some good progress on the radio today. I finally got that missing coil reinstalled in the chassis and all connected. I made a small offset bracket to allow me to utilize the existing mounting hole that was in the chassis. Otherwise I'd have to drill a big 5/16 hole for the new coil to fit into. And it also served the purpose of bringing the coil downward and over to get it closer to where the original one was, because these wires aren't long enough to reach otherwise. I still ended up having to replace one piece of wire, and I used some of that solid core modern cloth covered wire for that to go from the coil over to the band switch. The piece of wire that was on there was just missing all of its insulation, and it was too short to reach where it needed to go. I also had to replace both of the wires on the tuning condenser, and again I used the reproduction cloth wire. So I think most of the electrical work underneath the chassis is done at this point. I've also got most of the dial assembly reinstalled, except I have to go get a shoulder washer for this screw because it's missing. That'll allow the screw to be tightened down without pinching this bracket against the chassis, because this has to be able to move a little bit. On the top side of the chassis I've had to replace some wires, mainly these two grid cap wires. both of the originals were really frayed and crumbly, and I wasn't able to salvage them. And the modern cloth covered wire is a bit too stiff and large to fit. You know, like right here where this yellow wire comes through the chassis, it would have been really hard getting that modern cloth wire through there. Plus, it's not a good idea to use solid core wire on something that needs to be moved around from time to time. So I just used the modern stranded 600 volt rated wire for that. So at this point, all I've got to do is get the dial lamps reinstalled and the rest of the dial face put back on. I got to put the extensions on the potentiometers, and I think I can start doing the alignment.